Good morning. Well done for coming out on an incredibly chilly day, and I think it's going to get chillier next week. I'm extremely honoured to be interviewing Helen Browning this morning, and I've been asked to do it in the style of Desert Island Discs, which is slightly ridiculous because Helen has actually been on the real Desert Island Discs. So there's no way I can take on Kirsty Young.
Can we have some music, though?
Helen, as you have just heard, is CEO of the Soil Association, where she has been in that position since 2011, I think. She farms on a Church of England tenancy farm in Wiltshire, Eastbrook, which she took on when she was just 24, and we'll maybe come on to that in due course. She's been described by various people, but including Riverford, Guy Sing Watson's organic veg box, as a force of nature. That force of nature meant that she was awarded an OBE for her services to the organic farming movement. She has also been described by the lovely lady from Red Lion Books, who I mentioned I was interviewing Helen this morning, as, oh, the pig woman. Her own book, Pig, will be for sale, and we'll both be doing a signing afterwards. But Helen, maybe I can start with this idea of being a force for nature and talking about sort of where that came from in your childhood, because you grew up on the farm, you spent a long time there because you had various, I think, illnesses, which meant that you were farm-bound rather than in school. And you have described in the past feeling most yourself when your boots are on the ground and you're in the field. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Where do you think that this absolute alignment with the natural world and farming came from?
Thank you. Well, I was in that world, on the farm, every moment I wasn't in bed being ill, from as early as I can possibly remember. And I had far more empathy as a kid with the natural world, with the animals out there, than I ever did with people. I lost it with people quite early on. They seemed to be doing nothing but destroying the place. And the animals and the land was where I was happiest and where I spent my time. And, you know, I had that amazing childhood where I was out there with my brother catching rabbits, ferreting for rabbits for our pocket money. I was out there beating on the chute. I was going to market with Dad. I was tagging around the farm all the time. And it was my playground. And in those days, you know, we had so much freedom. Actually, you know, we were not told, right, you can't go here, can't do that. We were just let go. And so I think, you know, in some ways, that was my life. That was where I loved to be. And I didn't want to, you know, I rejected all the kind of female things I was supposed to be doing, and I just wanted to be out there with a shepherd, with a gamekeeper, with my dad, and I loved that world, and I loved the animal side of it in particular.
And you had, I think, there was some sort of maiden aunt influence as well, was there? Is that right?
I had these amazing great aunts. My grandfather, who I never knew, was one of 11, 2 boys and 9 girls, and 4 of those girls lived together and farmed together all their lives. And so we used to go and see the aunts at the park, the great aunts at the park, very, very regularly. My father was, you know, adored them, and they were wonderful people. They had this extraordinary life, which I didn't see in the women around me at the time. So they were out there, they were going hunting, they were drinking whiskey, they were farming, they were making butter, they were doing all these things. They had this freedom, and they were such positive people. They had this energy and this kind of, you know, they wore what they liked, and they said what they liked, and they laughed a lot. And I just adored that the bigness, the freedom of their life, of these maiden aunts, okay, but they were living a life that I wasn't seeing in the female community around me, and I wanted some of that.
I bet you did. Don't we all? That must have made a huge... When any of us can see someone who we're connected with or looks like us in a role, it seems much more reachable. But I don't think your mother agreed with that, did she?
My mother was horrified. My mother was horrified by the aunts because they lived in this really ramshackle house that hadn't been modernised, and the wallpaper was falling off the walls and all that kind of stuff. I didn't, and she like a lot of women at the time, she wanted me to be more female, more feminine, and wear those skirts and things, and have a more. So when I started saying I think I want to be a farmer, she was the one actually that said, "Oh no," and it was quite a battle. I felt I was always pulling away from this kind of image of what a woman should do and what a woman should be. And interestingly, it was more her and one or two other women in my life that were the challenge rather than the men.
Interesting. And how young were you when you broke the news to her that that's what you wanted to do?
Well, I broke the news to my dad first.
Sensible.
Very sensible. And I think I was about 8.
Okay.
I've got a really vivid memory of being up on the Ridgeway and saying to him in the middle of doing something else, I think I want to be a farmer. And him being slightly dismissive at the time in a nice way, but saying, well, yeah, we could find you a goat and a sheep or two, and kind of I was saying, I want to be a proper farmer. Mum was just, why don't you go to secretarial college and then you can do the books on the farm and all this kind of stuff. So I'm never going to learn to type because I'll end up being the secretary. So it was a bit of a push me, pull you on that front.
But when you got your way, I mean, you had 2 brothers, and still now in the case of sort of natural selection, it's the boys who end up taking on the farm. But eventually, at 24, your dad did hand over the reins. That must have been quite frightening.
It was quite frightening. It was quite surprising. I'd kind of gone to agricultural college and done my degree in agricultural technology, and I'd spent a year as part of that on my industrial placement, much against the advice of the college, who were really against it. I was the first research student on the first project that the Ministry of Agriculture, as it was then, had ever run on the difference between organic and conventional farming systems. So I'd spent a year really digging deep into organic during that year. Anyway, I came back to the farm in '86, thinking I was just going to sort of work there and help. And within about 3 months of arriving back there, Dad said, right, I'm off. Carry on. And at the same time, the farm manager, he'd had a farm manager for a long period of time, had just announced that he was leaving too. Oh. And so suddenly I was quite in the deep end. And it was a very, very, very stressful period. But it was also amazing to have that opportunity at that age. Yeah. And I always say to farmers now, it's because usually still male farmers, but, always try and encourage them to give their kids free rein because, and give them a chance to make their mistakes while they're young. So it was an amazing thing to have the opportunity to do.
But how now you can be one guy in charge of 1,000 acres just by yourself, but presumably then you inherited a team. It wasn't just a farm.
Yes.
And presumably they were all probably male and probably significantly older than you.
Yeah, all male, all twice my age, and that was the biggest challenge of all. Was the blokes. They were very. They were sceptical, obviously, about having a new female boss, a young boss, and somebody who had these organic tendencies. So they were very nervous indeed. And they'd also been managed in a very authoritarian way. On farms in those days, Dad went down the yard in the morning, or the farm manager went down the yard, and right, Jim, you plough that field, Jim, Fred, you go and do, plant that hedge or whatever it was. So I came back with all these ideas about team building and sharing, decision making and all this kind of touchy-feely stuff, and that landed like a lead balloon. So they were completely at sea for a period of time. So I ran a trial on organic on 20 acres to kind of give everybody a bit of confidence that this might work. But the breakthroughs, rather sadly, came when I had to sack somebody in front of everybody else at 7:30 in the morning. Having tried all this kind of more, enlightened management style, I just had to kind of put my boot in. And in a way, that changed the dynamic quite enormously because everybody went, I went home thinking, oh my God, I completely failed. And actually the report went, oh man, she's not just there's something in that woman after all. and I recognized that you can't change the management of a team overnight like that. You have to do it more subtly. So they needed a bit more boundary. They had to have a bit more boundary for a while.
Yeah. Can I ask you about your organic tendencies then? Because you... and where they came from, because when you were growing up, it was a huge sea change in farm management. And it was also, other people, including William Kendall, spoke yesterday, described it was that particular time when you went from abundance to destruction in quite a short space of time. And I think I am right in remembering that your father did what everyone else was doing, which was taking out hedgerows to make more productive land, sweating your asset, I think, is the phrase described. Is that right? And you saw that?
Yeah, he was very much at the forefront of all the latest technology. He did stay as a mixed farmer, though, which a lot of farmers didn't. So he did carry on having livestock and arable crops. And so that made it a little bit easier when we went down the organic route because we still had the fences and the water and that kind of thing. No, he was right at the forefront of all of that. And he would describe the advent of, broad spectrum herbicides as just a miracle.
Yeah.
Because, he's been battling away with things like charlock or whatever it was for decades, and suddenly one quick spray and it's all gone.
Well, it is, yeah.
And so he bought into all of that and did comply with this, let's rip out the hedges. I mean, he was a shooting man, so, the shooting people kept some cover because they needed it for their game birds. So it wasn't all lost. But there was that rationalization. And I hated seeing that change in the landscape. I just, it wasn't particularly rational or kind of even particularly environmental. I just hated seeing the landscape change in that kind of way. And I did feel queasy about the way we were using these things called ulvermasts. Anybody remember the ulvermast where you put a pole up in the air and you drifted herbicide and pesticide across your fields, so it just kind of went everywhere in a kind of and we flew on fertilizer onto our beautiful chalk downland, destroying all the orchids and all those wonderful things. Anyway, so I saw all that happen.
Well, I mean, I speak as someone whose parents left their wedding in a sprayer helicopter from my grandparents' farm. But there were plenty of your contemporaries who went along with it, who listened to their father's strong advice that it was a miracle and this is how we were going to feed the world, and didn't fight it. But you did fight it, and quite early on. Do you think that played into why your father handed the reins over? Because he knew how passionately you felt about changing it? I mean, he clearly didn't say, no, we're not going to change the farming system. He said, go for it.
Yeah, he said, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I'm not going to stand in your way.
Wow. Okay.
And that's really big.
Yeah, it's huge, yeah.
And actually, we always had a wonderful relationship. And we continued having a wonderful relationship because even though I was changing things, he could remember some of the stuff that most people had forgotten. He'd farmed without this stuff in his very early years. He'd started his own farming career really young. So actually, he was a great ally in many ways too, because he could recall some stuff that I needed to learn about. So the biggest accolade in my life actually was when he came around the farm, 20 years later, and said, I've never seen this place looking so well.
Oh, wow.
And I think for me that him both having that confidence and in that I was going to have to make a balls of it or do whatever I was going to do, and then
validation of it.
And that validation,
that is huge. And then you became the pig woman. Because when you go to Helen's farm, her name is in lights pretty much, isn't it?
Don't.
Helen Browning. But when you began focusing on pork and high welfare pork, presumably you deliberately wanted to identify this belonging to a particular place or a particular person rather than a generic kind of brand. What was the thinking behind Helen Browning's
the brand.
pigs. Yeah.
The brand. So with the pigs, just to start with, I'd never even touched a pig before I bought a pig, and I started keeping pigs because I was outraged at the way pigs and poultry were being kept, which I've been exposed to for the first time when I was at Harper, seeing this kind of these state-of-the-art places, and I just thought one of the things I'm going to try and do is show that it's possible to keep these animals in a much more humane way and still make it commercially viable. So I had a go, bought a couple of pigs, and off we went. But then I had to make it commercially viable. So we had to start selling the stuff and adding value to the stuff and all the rest of it. And for a while we sold as Eastbrook Farm Organic Meats. In fact, that's still what the business is called. And then my now partner came to the farm to run the marketing and said, it's got to be a woman on the label. You've got to put your name out there. People need to know that there's a woman who cares about this stuff, actually guaranteeing that what you're buying, is going to be looked after in the right kind of way. So he insisted that my name went on the pack. And I found that really odd to start with. And I've actually, I'm blind to it now, but to some people when they come to the village and, our pub and hotel has got Helen Browning all over it, because if we're going to lose money running a pub, then we might as well make sure it reinforce the brand. And it's just ghastly in the village you're in, having this Helen Browning stuff all over the place. It just feels ghastly, but I just ignore it. But it is really weird. But he was right in a way.
Yeah.
To probably try and use that in that way.
And how did you find it trying to break into that market, given that you were a change maker, absolutely, in terms of getting high welfare pork in mainstream supermarkets and so on? How much of a challenge was that?
Oh, the biggest. The farming, relatively speaking, is straightforward. The marketing, turning product into stuff and getting it sold, is an absolute nightmare. Yeah. Particularly in meat, actually, which is a short shelf life product, so if you don't get on the shelf within 4 or 5 days, it's in the freezer, or it is a nightmare, and all the real roller coaster ride that we've had financially over time has been largely on the marketing side. It's been brilliant. I've learned a lot, but God, it's been hard work. Trying to get that, and it's still not straightforward today. We've never got it taped. It works for a while, and then something else happens. If Brexit happens, or Ukraine happens, or foot and mouth happens, or all these things happen and throw all the best laid plans completely off track. Hard.
Well, I was going to ask you what your formula was, but it sounds like
I haven't got a formula.
That you can
I always worry people. Helen, tell us about your successes. I don't think we've had any successes. Well, our success is survival. We're still there. We're still doing it. We've created some stuff, but actually, don't ever set me up as a success story.
Well, I think you're having seen the spectrum of things that you're doing and massively underplaying what you have got at the moment, because you just launched a new, relatively new gin.
Gin? Yeah, we're in drinks now. They have a longer shelf life. Over the last few years, I've always been passionate about trees. And on a tenanted farm, you can't plant trees everywhere because your landlords get really pissed off. So I've got 200 acres I actually own now. And now I'm smothering the place with trees of all sorts. So we're experimenting with agroforestry. So that gives opportunity requirement to develop a whole new series of products that are less meat-based and more plant-based. And we launched a gin, and we've just launched a blackcurrant spirit. So watch this space.
I've tried both of them. They're very good.
Yeah, they are.
Let me move you on to the Soil Association. I think probably 20 years ago, you were quoted as saying, organic has been trailblazing for 60 years, creating an alternative path. It's time now for that alternative to be mainstream. The reality is that it's not. So the organic market is between 2 and 3% of the UK food market. It's bigger in Europe, and certainly the EU have come out as saying that they would like to move a quarter of all of their farms to organic by 2030. Whether they manage to achieve that, I don't know. What do you think is stopping the growth of the UK organic market when it has flourished across the water?
I think in the UK, policymakers have always been institutionally wary, very often opposed to organic farming, unlike in a lot of the rest of Europe. In most of the rest of Europe, and in quite a lot of the places around the world, organic is seen as a real solution. It delivers on your environmental, your climate change, your animal welfare, your biodiversity, all these kind of things that everybody's wanting to drive to, which is why I was drawn to it. It seems such an elegant solution to a number of the challenges the world's facing. But in the UK, it hasn't ever been really supported by policymakers. So it feels like we're always battling against that kind of headwind. We've also got a very consolidated retail sector in the UK compared to the rest of Europe.
Right.
And that hasn't helped. What Tesco decides to stock, is a massive influence on what goes on shelf, what people see, what they're exposed to. So I think there's a whole load of issues that we've got in the UK. But I think it's also quite hard to think that, and this is maybe something we want to get onto if we've got time, but that actually markets are going to solve all these problems, that consumer choice is going to be the way we get out of this mess. And I think while you've still got, in organic, a very relatively small amounts of products who've never had the efficiencies of scale, so it's always been quite hard to keep the price premium at the level it needs to be. And I don't know that premiumized markets are the way, in food anyway, that we're going to really shift the dial.
And when you say keep the price it needs to be, you mean because our food is cheap and we have become used to our food being cheap, and it's not priced to show its real cost?
It's not at all. So the true costs of food are not accounted in the price you pay at the till. That may be the right, that there may be reasons to do that, but if you're not putting it into the price at the till, then you've got to put it into the system somewhere else. So, and I think we're starting to do that now. So we're starting to see, sustainable farming incentive, also private markets developing. Okay, it's a Wild West at the moment, but they will rationalise that allows some of the benefits to be paid for outside of the product. And I think if we can get that to happen so that you can reduce the requirement for people to pay at the end of the line, then that will help. You also need to get some volume going through.
Right.
And to start making sure that retailers don't apply over high margins to products that they think that a certain type of person will buy. There is certainly...
That happens.
Right. So there's all sorts of problems we need to sort out, actually, to get organic playing the role that it needs to play. But it can happen, and it should happen, because it's the most sensible way to producing our food.
And can we talk about, given that we're talking about scale and volume, can we talk about the intersection with regenerative? Because that has become a buzzword fast. I mean, I'm not sure that many people would necessarily have been able to explain what it is 5 years ago, and now it's more or less government policy. Most of the sustainable farming incentive options tie in some way to it. Can you give us, I mean, I imagine many people in this room may know the answer, but for those who don't, what the difference is between something that's regeneratively farmed and something that's organically farmed?
Well, regenerative is a wonderful word, and I think that's why it's caught on so quickly. It's just a lovely term, isn't it? Doesn't it make you feel good?
Yes.
And I love it. So, but organic is a really clearly prescribed set of standards that across the whole world, certainly across Europe, if you call yourself organic, you have to have met those standards. And they cover the whole of the supply chain. So they cover everything from the inputs you're usually not allowed to use, to animal welfare, to the conditions at slaughter, the processing, the additives you can use in your food, the whole gamut. Regenerative focuses particularly on the soil, and it's a looser term, and that's both its opportunity and its threat, I guess.
Right.
And it's focused on keeping the ground covered, keeping diverse plants in the ground, getting animals back on the land, reducing tillage, all really, really, really sensible things to be doing. But it doesn't cover the whole of the supply chain. It doesn't cover all of the issues. But it's a brilliant place to start. And I'm super excited by the fact that so many farmers are getting turned on by regenerative and starting to really change the way they're doing things. It's not all perfect, and my worry is that actually, a bit like organic did in some ways, but we've got that bit more protection, it's going to be captured by the corporates. It is being captured by the corporates.
Yes. Yeah.
And they may apply it in ways that are not as thorough as a lot of the farmers who are now on this trail would like to see happen. So I worry that regenerative will be taken from the farmer. It's a strong farmers movement. That's where it's come from. And be turned into a marketing ploy by some of the big corporates. Now, we want the big corporates to be driving change, to be buying into that change, to be funding that change. So, it's not saying don't get involved, but they do need to be really clear about what they mean when they call their products regenerative.
So do you think it should be certified, the word regenerative?
I don't at the moment, actually, because, we didn't really define completely, put a standard set around organic in a very thorough way for something like 30 or 40 years after organic was first, thought about or used as a term. And one of the challenges when you start to say, well, this is exactly what the standard set looks like, is that you're in danger of fossilizing something. And at the moment, I think that farmers are learning a lot together about how to do things differently. It's giving an entry point for people, who are just taking those very first few steps. If you ask them to jump to the other side of a chasm before they've even taken those first few steps, then I think we'll have to invent something else that allows them to take those first few steps. So I think it feels too soon to me to put a really prescriptive set of standards. What I would say, and what the Soil Association is really involved with, is how do we measure the outcomes from these systems? Judge it by its results. And that's not just carbon. Everybody's on the carbon bandwagon, but we need to be measuring carbon, biodiversity, water, social impacts, animal welfare, emissions, the whole caboodle, that'll do. And in a simple, easy way that farmers can get their heads around and ideally do themselves, so that you actually can see what the different versions of the system are delivering.
And so tell us something about Soil Association Exchange, because what's interesting about that, given the Soil Association is an organic regulator and is primarily concerned with organic farmers, as far as I understand it, Soil Association Exchange will absolutely work with conventional farmers. You do not have to be organic to be involved with them.
No. So let me just go right back one more. We're a charitable group. We're a charity who owns a certification body, but also does a lot of charitable activities. So we run a lot of programs, and we run things like Food for Life and Innovative Farmers and lots of things. So it's not the first time that we work with a broader audience than organic. Food for Life, which is a set of standards for schools and caterers, has a bronze, silver, gold. It's only at gold that you get into organic. And, so we've tried to find ways in to shift the mainstream in the right direction. Innovative Farmers, you don't have to be organic to be part of Innovative.
And Innovative Farmers, explain, because
it's a way of supporting farmers to do the farmer-led research.
Yeah.
So we give small grants to farmer groups who come together to tackle a challenge. And usually that will be a challenge that is going to reduce their input use, but it doesn't require you to be organic to be involved. So we've worked, I think, really broadly for a very long time. And Soil Association Exchange, as you say, is our latest offering to the world, which is this way of measuring the outcomes from farming systems, and then helping farmers think about, in their own case, what's the best way, what are the ways that I can improve, and how can I get funded to do it? Because we've got to make sure this stuff is profitable for farmers. And you're right, probably at the moment, 90% of the farmers in that are non-organic, about 10% are. We'll get some amazing data, which actually will start to tell us, what's working well, what techniques are really working well. So yeah, Soil Association is kind of charitable, all the businesses lining up to the charitable mission of the organisation. It's a really exciting place to be involved.
Especially now, it feels.
Yeah.
Especially now. And you've just released, I think, a new report called The Time Is Now, which mirrors quite nicely that quote that you gave 20 years ago about the time being now. Do you feel
Time is always now.
But I'm interested, given the huge change in public policy payments, public money for public good, the fact that last week at the Oxford Farming Conference, not only did you see a 10% increase on all the sustainable farming incentive options, but things like upland grazing, which had been kind of woefully underfunded, thanks to people like James Rebanks and other people, it moved from £185 a hectare to something like £650 a hectare. A huge increase in managing species-rich grassland for grazing. So we are in a different place now than we were 20 years ago.
Yep.
So do you think the time is now for organic to really start motoring with the help of this sort of regenerative bridge, or do you think I'm being overly optimistic about that?
I think that the regenerative bridge is a very good term. I think that an awful lot of farmers now are starting to do things differently, and some of them will end up, hopefully, as organic farmers. And I think organic farmers will learn a lot from what's happening in the regenerative space as well. Yeah, a lot. I'm learning a lot.
What do you think? Because given that it's founded on the shoulders of all the work that was done in the regenerative movement about soil and regeneration, what can organics learn from regenerative?
Well, one of the things I'm really excited about is how do we achieve arable cropping without ploughing in organic. So there's been this kind of organic versus plough versus glyphosate kind of debate raging in deep farming circles for a long time, and the Holy Grail, which I tried to do when I first came back to the farm 37 years ago, was to strip till, to put our cereals into the grass lays without ploughing them.
So just to explain for those who may not know what a strip till is.
So normally in rotational farming, you grow your leguminous crop, your clovers and whatever, beans or whatever, for a year or two or three, and then you plough that out and you put your cereal crops in. And you lose some of the carbon and you destroy some of the soil life when you plough the ground. So the conventional farmers will say, well, just put a bit of glyphosate on it, kills everything, and then you can direct drill straight into the dead stuff that you've created. Neither of them are perfect. So the idea of being able to create a strip of wheat within your clover, so that the clover feeds the wheat directly, and you don't ever break the soil or invert the soil, is the Holy Grail. We tried to do it, couldn't, there was no research support for doing that kind of, non-wealth creating product stuff, 30, 40 years ago. And now this is being worked on. We've done some work through Innovative Farmers on living mulches. Wild Farmed are doing a load of work on this.
You're growing for them.
And we're growing for them. And they've done a lot of work on the engineering, because we talk about genetics all the time and inputs, but actually getting the engineering right and being able to use things like GPS to be able to guide your mower between the crops of these rows of wheat and that sort of stuff. So it's fantastically exciting, because if we can grow our arable crops that way, it will be a really big breakthrough. If you combine no-till horticulture and arable systems that don't require the chemicals either, with agroforestry, with bringing more trees into the landscape, you're really starting to motor in terms of ecological farming systems.
It feels like we're going to move on to questions in a minute, so do start thinking of them now. It feels like we in the UK are at the forefront of this. Am I optimistic? Am I being ignorant about that? I know there are farmers in the US who are doing it, but thanks to the public policy payments, are we leading the way on this?
So in terms of the way, since we've come out of Europe, we've been able to reshape our farming policy, I think we are probably in a really interesting space where we are doing stuff that isn't happening in the rest of the world. It was the only, it was the one good thing about Brexit. It gave us a chance to move much more rapidly into doing more interesting things with public money. And I hope we'll keep experimenting with that and tweaking it as we go, because there's lots of potential to release if we can get this stuff right. If we can then start to also grab that private money, the supply chain money that needs to, with all this disclosure of, TD&S or whatever it's called, the climate and the nature disclosures that companies have to do, then I think we can drive change really quite quickly. Whether it's quickly enough, but, a lot more quickly than we have done.
Thank you. Any questions in the time that we have left? Lady at the scarf, 5 rows back, please. We don't have a huge amount of time, so can I make a plea to do a quite concise question?
Okay, well, I'll just start off by saying I'm just about to become your biggest fan. I'm so excited by this talk, and I really, really appreciate it. So when you referred to the organic industry, or the sector currently being 2 to 3% of the UK sector of farming production.
Food.
Obviously, the Organic Soil Association and regenerative farming all doing amazing things to shift the dial. But is there not also the major issue of the pharmaceutical and agribusiness lobby in this country and the incredible power and control that it continues to take within government decisions despite having backed out of Europe?
Yeah, it's a big problem, and the sort of influencing, I don't think many of us recognise how much influence some of those corporates have, and that's been going on for a very long time. So I think that is a big challenge. I think in the UK at the moment, in particular, the government is very keen on the biotechnology sector, and wanting to give that every opportunity to fly, not necessarily because they want gene-edited crops to be grown all over the UK, but they just want those research institutes and the IP that can be developed from those to be a big part of the economy. So those are some of the challenges. Those are some of the forces that are pushing in the other direction.
Yes, down here, please. There's a microphone. I think it has to record you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for such a good talk. Have you looked at the Soil Association, have you looked at using brown seaweed biostimulants as a way of reducing farmers' inputs of NPK into their farm, into the artificial fertilizers?
So seaweed is a complex area. Probably haven't got enough time to do all of it. We are historically we used to allow seaweeds to be used as soil improvers or as feed additives. Then we became very nervous about the exploitation of seaweeds. And I think that now with people starting to farm seaweed in a way that may be more benign, it's something we can look at again. I think we just need to be careful in the marine environment that we're encouraging the right things, not the wrong things. So at one point, calcified seaweed was allowed as an input 30 years ago. It's no longer permitted. And then there's a lot of work going on seaweed in terms as a methane suppressor, the red seaweeds for animal feeds. But yeah, so we're cautious about seaweed.
Up here on the, just in front of the laptop.
Hello. We run an organic farm, organic.
To your farm.
We had a message from one of our customers who said, "Oh, please don't call yourselves regenerative because Monsanto are leading on this term, and we would never associate toxic organic with Monsanto." And then I did my research on Googling regenerative agriculture, and Syngenta came one of the top with an explanation. And then I saw several other definitions, and they were all different.
Yeah.
Now, how is the Soil Association going to win this? This regen saga, having so many definitions, unless it links it directly to organic? Thank you.
So you already have a regenerative organic standard, which was developed in the States. Rodale have actually largely invented the regenerative kind of philosophy. So there is a sort of link there when people want to make it. But as I said earlier on, I think it's really I'm really nervous about the way the big corporates are using regenerative as a way to justify all sorts of things. And, you've got people doing regenerative really, really well, and you've got people using it, it's kind of business as usual with a cover crop or two thrown in. And there's a very big difference, which is why our approach has been to say, let's actually scrutinise what this is delivering and what's actually happening. And whilst we don't think you kind of ought to be putting a set standard around it at the moment, let's make sure that whenever you're selling, if you're using that term at the point of sale, you should really be clear about what you are allowing and doing. So I don't want to go to war with regenerative, because actually it's bringing all these great farmers, a lot of great farmers, in the right direction. The danger is when the corporates get hold of it, like Monsanto or others, and start to use it to their own ends. It's a complicated space.
Do you think, just to take Chair's prerogative for a moment, you spoke earlier about private money coming into it, whether that's, I don't know, a water company, whether it's a bank, whether it's house builders. If you're trying to measure outcomes and not restrict a set of specifications about how you farm, but what the outcomes in. Once we monetize the outcomes, do you think that will have an impact on what is seen as regenerative and how things can be sold? If you can put on a packet, this product has sequestered this much carbon, or this has saved this much water, or this is...
I think that is a way that you can start to get those benefits paid for before, not on the product, without putting it on the consumer.
Yeah, right.
But I do think it's going to be vital that we ensure that people measure a holistic range of things and not just one thing. Because if you just go on carbon, you do absolutely stupid things in other areas.
Yes.
So I think you have to have that kind of more holistic framework, and you have to be measuring and showing your measures against all of those things, not just one of them. Yeah. And I do think we will always need standards alongside outcome measures. It's not that you can move everything to just saying, let's see what the system delivers. I think you do need standards too. But I think that we've been strong on standards around the place and less strong on measuring and learning what's working well in real life.
Helen's going to be outside signing her book, so if you have burning questions for her, do come and ask her then. Not too long, I don't want to keep her too long. But I just thank you so much for your time this morning, and I just wanted to kind of wrap up by reminding everyone, I'm sure Helen knows this already, but there's a wonderful quote when talking about the kind of dynamism that means that you end up sitting under a stage with your name on it saying that you're a green icon. The kind of the kind of tenacity and the personality that you have to have was summarised so well, I think, by the co-founder of the Soil Association, Eve Balfour, our mutual hero, who said that she never minded being called a crank, because a crank was a small and inexpensive piece of equipment that causes revolutions, which is exactly what you have done.
Thank you very much.